Good morning, everybody. Excited that you're here. Mobile, Foley, guys at the correctional facilities, we love you. We're excited that you're with us. Everybody watching online, I guess you're okay too. Malbus campus, would you welcome everybody that's tuned in today? It's a good day. It really is. And Pastor Trey really kicked off the series in grand fashion last week. I want to encourage you to go back and listen to it if you haven't. But where we want to pick up this week, week 2, is I want to take you to Genesis 15. Right off the bat, I want to take you there. And as you're in Genesis 15, you're going to notice something. That we're going to go, not to a castle, not to a grand manor. We are going to go to a tent. And inside this tent, we're going to find a guy named Abram. And Abram is not having a good day. As a matter of fact, we're finding Abram in bad shape, and he is sitting in there, and there is a storm brewing inside of him. I don't know if you could ever describe yourself as being found with a storm brewing inside of you. He's upset, he's embittered, he's complaining to anybody who will listen. And to understand why Abram is the way he is, you say, wait, don't you mean Abraham? He'll get there one day. But right now, he's Abram. And the rest of his life is about to hinge on what happens in this chapter. But what we've got to understand is why he is like he is in this chapter. You see, a few chapters before, Abe was just a guy hanging out. And then the Lord shows up and says, hey, if you'll follow me, if you will make me your God, then guess what? I will make many nations out of you. As a matter of fact, you will be the father of many nations. Abraham takes the deal, follows God, and he does it in such a way that there is this non-surface level between Abraham and God. As a matter of fact, God on several different occasions calls Abram his friend. This is not a surface level relationship. However, in order to be the father of many nations, you have to first be a father. And that's the problem going into chapter 15, is that he doesn't have kids and he's getting older. Biology is happening. And he's sitting in his tent and he is upset. He is embittered in his spirit. And then in the beginning of chapter 15, God shows up. And right away in the beginning of the chapter, you notice that there are two very different moods in this tent. Abe is sitting there, he's upset, and God shows up and the Hebrew indicates to us that he is full of cheer. Abe, I'm here. I'm your reward. I'm here for you. And Abram looks up at God and says, and what good is that? What good is everything that you have been feeding me on about tomorrow when today I don't have a kid? Abram is sitting in a tent telling the God who sees all, look around, just look around. I don't know if you've ever had days where you're very happy you're not God. Days where you know the world's population would be smaller if you were God. We thank God that God is God. Genuinely, that probably won't make its way into a worship song, okay? But we are grateful that he is God. It's a very serious moment. There's a storm brewing inside of Abram. And you'll notice that they're on different pages. Why? Because your heart will always be out of sync with God's if your eyes are in a different place than his are. The eyes direct the heart. And God does something to get Abraham out of this storm, out of this mood, to flip the situation around. He does something. He doesn't engage Abram in the tent. He doesn't argue with Abram in the tent. He has to do something first. And that's where we're going to pick this up in Genesis 15. And what I want you to do is I want you to look at verse 5. It says, then the Lord took Abram outside. Now, we're going to come back to that in just a moment. Just kind of hold that in your mind for a moment. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. See, what God had to do is he had to get Abram out of his tent. He took Abram outside. Now, the thing is that he had to get his eyes off of something, but what was God getting his eyes on? It looks like it's stars, but it's something so much grander than that. See, God doesn't have this grand obsession with burning balls of gas in the sky. There's something bigger going on here. God was getting his eyes on something else. And in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, the author of Hebrews shines light on exactly what God was getting Abram's eyes on. I love the book of Hebrews, truly my favorite book in the entire Bible. But one of the best known chapters in the entire Bible, it is in Hebrews, and it's chapter 11. Now, many people call it the Hall of Faith, but chapter 11 is incredible because it gives us the clearest view of what faith really is. It lets us know that without faith, it's impossible to please God, and that our faith pleases God. But then it gives us name after name and story after story and life after life of individuals who stepped forward and in faith followed God and they became overcomers. And it's not for you and I to kind of just, well, look at those elite people, but it's inspirationally instructive for you and I. The Bible is saying, and it's putting out these lives in front of us to say, look at these overcomers and become like them. Look at these overcomers and have faith like theirs. And in chapter 11, we find that Abraham has now made it into this list. Why? Check out what it says in verse 10. It says this: Abraham was confidently looking forward. So this is huge. I want you to see that. God was putting his eyes on something. What was God taking his eyes off of? The tent. And what was God putting his eyes on? Check this out. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. God was fixing Abraham's eyes on eternity. Why? Because the heart follows the eyes. And Paul grasps this concept so much that when he writes his letter to the Colossians, in chapter 3, he is writing instructions to those who are new to the faith. I don't know if you've ever trained somebody at work, but everybody has a, hey, I know what I'm supposed to train you on right now, but the first thing you need to know is, and whatever comes out of your mouth is normally what you have found to be the most important part of your job. This is where Paul goes right away. He is saying in chapter 3, right away in verse 1, the most important thing to you, those of you who are just beginning to follow Jesus, is not just where your feet fall when you follow him, but something else. I want you to take a look at chapter 3. It says, since you have been raised to new life with Christ, set your sights on the realities of heaven. It's where your eyes need to be. Set your sights on the realities of heaven, where Christ sits in the place of honor at God's right hand. Think about the things of heaven, not about the things of earth. For you died to this life, and your real life is hidden with Christ in God. I want you to look back at that verse 1 real quickly there. Set your sights on the realities of heaven. I want you to remember those 3 words because I'm going to wrap the rest of the message around those 3 words. Set your sights. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean just to simply put your eyeballs somewhere? Well, it starts there, but it goes someplace even deeper. It means set your life's focus upon these things. Set your affections upon them. The place where you know you will derive joy and satisfaction in your life. Set your sights on the realities of heaven, on the unseen and not on the seen. We see principles played out when it comes to this. On the bad side of this, we know that many things that Scripture calls sin begin with where our eyes are and are locked in place by where our eyes remain. Things like covetousness, things like greed, things like adultery, things like lust, begun with the eyes, held in place by where our eyes remain. However, it's not just a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it can be the greatest thing in the world. You know that person that deep down inside, you have a suspicion that you were created to be? You know that person that you know that if you reached your greatest potential in God, that person would be? That is what is unleashed when our eyes are on the right place. We see, and you don't even have to have read the Bible before to know the story of Peter walking on the water after Jesus. Peter is jumping out of a boat and walking on water. And we see that he is only able to do such when his eyes are where? On Jesus. And the moment that he takes his eyes off of Jesus and he puts his eyes on the natural, he puts his eyes on the very true reality of the waves, and the wind, what happens? He begins to sink. Why? The heart follows the eyes in a very, very, very real thing, in a real way. Hebrews chapter 12 follows Hebrews 11. And I know that's profound. Make sure to get that in your notes, all right? And the thing is that it begins in verse 1 with the word therefore, meaning, hey, all of that you heard in chapter 11, the hall of faith, all of these amazing individuals, all of this, therefore, taking that into account, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Now, you may look at that and be like, that's lofty, that's great, that's awesome. Well, how do you do that? Well, that's why I love how verse 2 begins. We do this by... People say the Bible's not helpful, all right? We do this by fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. Some of your translations will say the author and the perfecter of our faith. But it's very important where our eyes are, that they're not on the seen, that they are on the unseen, they are on the eternal. Now, you may have a genuine something in your heart where as you hear this, you say, but Danny, that's hard. In this modern world, that's difficult to get my eyes off of all of this seen and onto some kind of unseen. Like, how do you do that? I love reading stories of early followers of Jesus, the first and the second centuries, during when Christianity was illegal. And people would, when genuinely accepting Christ and following him, getting baptized, you were signing your own death sentence. I love reading stories about them. Why? Because they're not so different from you and I. They had real life concerns, real bills to pay, real jobs to hold down, real families to lead. They had these things, and guess what? They chose Jesus in the midst of them. They chose the unseen over the seen, and their legacy is laid out for us to follow in that way. I found myself chewing specifically on a story of a few Roman soldiers inside of a legion during the time when Christianity was illegal. And these Roman soldiers together found Christ and kind of secretly banded together to build each other in their faith, but then they were found out by their commander. And their commander, knowing that they were good soldiers, brought them in and tried to persuade them out of their faith. When they wouldn't budge, he tried flattery and tried to flatter them out of their faith. You're so much smarter than this. Why are you putting your life in your own hands over something we can't even see? And they wouldn't budge. And he knew that he would have to put them to death. So what this commander did was he decided to try persuasion in the execution. He brought them, it was in the middle of the winter, he brought them out to a frozen lake and made them strip down to nothing and made them stand there to be exposed by the wind. And as they're there shaking and shivering, he lined the outsides of the lake with bathtubs and filled them with hot water. He roasted meat over a fire. He poured hot liquid into goblets. And he shouted out to them, listen, all you've got to do is recant, and this is yours. And they stood there and they wouldn't move. After a little while, one of them, who was just a little bit weaker in his resolve, decided to desert them, and he ran off to one of the bathtubs and jumped right in, recanting his faith. And as that person is sitting in the bathtub, one of the Roman soldiers who is putting this on, who is just absolutely shocked at what he sees, looks over at his fellow soldier, points at the men shaking out on the ice, and says, have you ever believed in something like that before? Have you ever believed in something that way before? And the story goes that he took off his own armor and took off his own clothing and walked out onto the ice and looked at these men and said, I wish to be a Christian. Why? Their eyes were on the unseen. There was something more real about the unseen than those bathtubs and that meat and those goblets. Their eyes were on the eternal. That's where their eyes were. And this is what we have here. We have eternity laid out in front of us. One of the best quotes that I've heard about this that has stuck with me through the years is a quote by a man named Leonard Ravenhill. And he once said that this life is but a dressing room for eternity. That's all it is. This life is but a dressing room for eternity. That's all it is. And our obsession with our future, our obsession with tomorrow, will determine who we will be today. Or our lack of obsession with tomorrow will determine who we decide to be today. James chapter 4 talks about this life, and it describes it in a word as a vapor. Here today and gone tomorrow. I don't know if you've ever just sat and something happened in life where you just sat and dwelled on the truth of, man, it's so short. It's so quick. It's here today and gone tomorrow. Maybe you watched your kids age. Maybe you had a loved one pass and just the thought hits you. Man, it just goes by so fast. This life is but a vapor, that's all it is. In his book, Driven by Eternity, John Bevere, and I recommend that book to anybody with the ability to read. It is a really important book. In his book, Driven by Eternity, John Bevere, in order to get us to understand this analogy of this eyedropper to the Pacific Ocean of eternity, lays out this scenario. That if I was to tell you that how you lived your life for the next 24 hours would determine the next 70 years of your life, the type of income you would have, the car that you would drive, the place where you would live, your family, your family's health, everything for the next 70 years, how would you live the next 24 hours of your life? Would you live them carelessly? Would you live them thoughtlessly? Would you live them by chance? Or would you live them with great intention? Would any sacrifice in those 24 hours even feel like a sacrifice when knowing that the payoff is in the next 70 years? This life is but a dressing room for eternity. That's all it is. And what we find here in Scripture is we find, and you say, well, okay, so how do I build a life like that? How do I build a life that matters for eternity? Well, Paul in 1 Corinthians 3 is speaking to his spiritual children. The people who are getting this letter are people that he personally has led to Christ. He personally has brought to the cross. And he is trying to get them to understand that eternity means more than just heaven or hell. That it's something so much grander and it goes so much further. He's trying to echo the truth that Pastor Trey laid out for everybody a few weeks ago when he talked about Jesus' parable of the three servants, that one day there comes an account that is given of stewardship before the master. And in verse 10, he does this. He's about to lay out our lives, and he's gonna use the analogy of a builder building a house. So follow me here. I'm gonna start in verse 10. Because of God's special favor to me, I have laid the foundation like an expert builder. Now others are building on it. But whoever is building on this foundation must be very careful, for no one can lay any other foundation than the one that we already have, Jesus Christ. Now, anyone who builds on that foundation may use gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, or straw. So I'm gonna pause right there. He is laying out that the choice of what you will build your life with, God leaves up to you. And you have two choices in terms of building material. Over here, you have gold, silver, and jewels. And over here, you have wood, hay, and straw. You can build your life out of the two of them. But continuing there in verse 13, but there is going to come a day of testing at the judgment day to see what kind of work each builder has done. Everyone's work will be put through the fire to see whether or not it keeps its value. If the work survives the fire, that builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. The builders themselves will be saved, but like someone escaping through a wall of flames. So Scripture is talking about this being as the believer's judgment. Heaven has already been decided. These are followers of Jesus who are giving an account of the stewardship of their life. Going to heaven has already been settled at this point. Now, what happens to wood, hay, and straw when fire goes through it? It turns to nothing. It turns to ash. What happens to gold, silver, and precious jewels when fire is put through there? Not only does it remain, but it even is purified at a greater level. It even gains value in that way. He's saying that there are going to be many on that day who will have impressive lives on earth. And he's talking about Christians. Impressive lives on this earth. Lives that make people ooh and ah and truly impress people. But it's built out of wood, hay, or straw. And the fire in that moment will show it to have little to no eternal value. That person will be saved, yes, but like a man escaping out of a house that is on fire. Nothing but the clothes on his back. It's a sobering verse, isn't it? It's very sobering. What am I building my life out of? Now, this sounds like a final exam here because it is. I kind of almost wish that there was like a midterm report card, right? Like a midlife, like I'm 38 years old and I kind of find myself saying like, how am I doing about midway through? Like, how am I doing? And this is why I love how Jesus writes chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation. If you have a Bible that the words of Jesus are in red letters, you will find Revelation 2 and 3 completely in red. Why? Because he is giving kind of these midterm report cards to 7 churches. He writes 7 letters to 7 churches. And in them, he gives his unvarnished, undiluted thoughts about how they're doing, who they are, and what they're living for. I don't know how you'd feel about coming home today, and as you drove home, you saw a scroll sticking out of your mailbox. And in them is the handwriting of Jesus himself telling you exactly how he feels about who you are, how you're living, and what you're living for. But this is what these 7 churches are receiving. And in chapter 3 is a letter that really has stuck out to me over the past 2 years. If I was to be personal here for a moment, I would say that the last 2 years, God has taken me and renovated my value system using this letter to this church. And it starts in a very familiar place, and this is in Revelation chapter 3. Write this letter to the angel of the church in Laodicea. This is the message from the one who is the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. I know all the things you do, that you are neither hot nor cold. I wish you were either one or the other. But since you are like lukewarm water, I will spit you out of my mouth. Now, for those of you who have been in the church world for a while, this is not unfamiliar to you. As a matter of fact, this analogy has been used many times, and I'm not here to say it's been used even wrong. Jesus is stating a disgust for lukewarm living. He is, genuinely. The problem is that we stop there, and very few people know what comes after the lukewarm water bit. And Jesus isn't just satisfied with pointing out their spiritual condition. He isn't just satisfied with pointing out this is your true state. But what I love about Jesus is that he takes a step in. He lets us know how lukewarmness happens in this letter. And then he gives an invitation because that's who Jesus is. He doesn't leave them. This is what I absolutely love. Now, in order to understand what he's about to say to the Laodiceans, I need you to understand the ancient city of Laodicea. Come to City Hope College with me just for a little bit here, okay? And understand this. If we were to get into a giant time machine, a large time machine here for a moment, we were to go back in time, we would notice 3 things about Laodicea and the city of Laodicea. The first thing we would notice is that the Laodiceans were rich. They were absolutely rich. Now, there are several different records in the ancient historical books about this, but let me give you just 2 examples. The Jews in Jerusalem were in really bad financial shape. They did not appeal to the Jews in Rome. They did not appeal to the Jews in Corinth or the Jews in Alexandria. They appealed to the Jews in Laodicea. And the Jews in Laodicea, you know what they did in response? They just passed a hat. They made a simple collection. They collected real quickly and they sent off whatever they had on them. They collected 22.5 pounds of gold for the Jews of Jerusalem. Now, for those of you who that doesn't do anything for, understand that with the current prices of gold today, that's around $956,000 from passing a hat. They had money, and a lot of it. In AD 60, an earthquake would destroy the entire city of Laodicea. And Rome sent messengers saying, hey, we want to help you rebuild it. And the citizens of Laodicea said, no, we're good. We got this. Wouldn't even accept aid from the central government. Why? Because they had all they needed. They didn't need any help from the outside. Well, then something else that you'd notice about Laodicea and the Laodiceans is this. The second thing you'd notice is that Laodicea was famous for its medical school. Specifically, they developed an eye salve for weak or failing eyes and eyesight. People would come to Laodicea to get their sight. You and I would notice people from all stretches of the Roman Empire coming in as these doctors and as these salve it's their final chance at eyesight. People came to the Laodiceans to get their sight. And the third thing that you and I would realize or notice about Laodicea is that Laodicea was famous for its clothing industry. Now, the Laodiceans raised a specific type of sheep that made a very specific type of wool, and they guarded it very closely, kind of like how centuries later the Chinese would guard the silkworms. Like it was a really closely guarded thing. And so they would shear the sheep there, they would mill the clothing there, and then they would export the most expensive clothing to all stretches of the ancient world. Laodiceans were known as the best dressed people in the Roman Empire. So with those things in mind, what do we think of them? How are they doing in the natural? They're doing pretty well in the natural. They have need of nothing. Nobody has it better than them. Sound familiar? Nobody has it better. Nobody in the world has it better than the Laodiceans. Yet how does the one whose eyes are fixed on the eternal see their true state? What does Jesus really see about how they truly are in the light of eternity? This is where verse 17 picks up in Jesus' letter to the Laodiceans. Jesus says, "You say, I am rich. I have everything I want. I don't need a thing. And you don't realize that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked." If you're a citizen in Laodicea and you get this letter, how does that shake you? These are all the things you're convinced you're not. When you look out at everybody else and compare yourself to citizens anywhere else, you are better off in all of these areas than your neighbors. And yet Jesus, with his eyes on eternity, says this is your true condition. You don't realize that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. Now, this is what I love about Jesus, is Jesus tells the truth. Absolutely, he will share with you the truth. He'll expose your true condition. We call that conviction. But he doesn't stop there. I honestly think that many people avoid church because they know that their true condition will be exposed, but they think it will end there. Understand that Jesus doesn't leave the Laodiceans, but he gives the Laodiceans two beautiful invitations. He looks at them and says, this is the way forward, follow me. And verse 18 is an entire invitation. It's his first invitation. What does he say next? This is what he says to the Laodiceans. So I advise you to buy gold from me. You say, hold on, Danny. I haven't seen gold bars on the menu of Common Grounds lately. How do you buy gold from Jesus? Well, he's referring to something, and maybe the next phrase will sound familiar. Gold that has been purified by fire. He's talking about the same thing Paul's talking about, that eternal building material, the building material that a life will be built of that has eternal value. Then Jesus says this, then you will be rich. And also buy white garments from me so that you will not be shamed by your nakedness. And ointment for your eyes so that you will be able to see. Now, are they naked in the natural? No. Are they blind in the natural? Not at all. He is speaking of their eternal condition and saying, buy gold from me, buy your garments from me, come to me for your eyesight, and you will be able to see. You will be able to be rich. You will be clothed. I hear that invitation to buy gold from me, and I think about all of the energy my heart has spent over the years on things made out of wood, hay, or straw, things of no eternal value, where my mind drifted during the day, the things that robbed me of sleep during the night that had no eternal value whatsoever. I think about the corporations that we've built and we've sacrificed marriages and relationships with our children that aren't even around in a generation because of mergers and bankruptcies. Think about countries whose flags have flown into battle and they don't even exist anymore, and yet we can count hundreds of thousands of people who have given their lives for those things made out of wood, hay, and stubble that aren't even around anymore. Buy gold from me. I want to be obsessed with building a life, not building sandcastles that won't be here when the next generation comes to the beach. I want to be obsessed with the eternal. You say, Danny, but you said Jesus gave 2 invitations to the Laodiceans. Absolutely. Because maybe you've been here in this room and you've been hearing me talk and you're like, Danny, you're talking to followers of Christ. You're talking to people who consider themselves saved. You have a point. But the thing is that Jesus extends an invitation. And in verse 20, he says something. That if you're in here and in this room and you have either realized that you're really not a follower of Jesus, maybe you said a prayer when you were like 4 or 5, but your life in no way has reflected any kind of following of Jesus. Or maybe you come in and you know what, I'm not walking with Jesus. Verse 20 is for you. Jesus says this, here I am. I stand at the door and I knock. He knocks at your door, the door of your heart. You say, you don't want me as a part of your church, Danny. I've been nothing but a spiritual disappointment my entire life. You don't know what I've done. You don't know what I've been through. That's why I love Jesus' next words. If anyone opens the door to me, if anyone opens the door to me, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. And today, if that is you, that second invitation is for you to simply open the door and you will find Jesus there waiting for you. He wants to come into your life. He wants to eat with you. He wants to be a part of your life. And at the end of this service, at every single one of our campuses, there's gonna be a ministry team that's gonna be up front. And I wanna invite you not to take a walk to your car as soon as service ends, but instead take the most important walk of your life and come to the front with one of these dear people and open the door to Jesus. So where do you end a message like this? Where do you go to end a message about eternity? I wanna end it where I began. I wanna end it in a tent. I wanna end it with Abram. And maybe you're in here and you came into this place and you have been living with that Abram-like angst inside of you, that frustration, that hollowness, that sickness of the spirit inside of you. Maybe that has been your life and the best descriptor of your life and what's been going on the inside of you. I wanna bring you to a story as I close. Several years ago, me and a few guys went out and we went deep sea fishing. And we went out on a day that we shouldn't have gone out. It was either right before or right after a hurricane. I can't remember which one. And the waves were doing this. Just seemed like a good idea, all right? And the waves were doing this. We got out several miles, and I do not get motion sickness. Something does make me nauseous, though, and it's the smell of diesel exhaust fumes. As I'm out there on the boat, the wind shifts in a way where I am just getting hit with this wall of diesel exhaust fumes. And then the motion of the boat. I mean, the boat is doing this. It's perfect storm, all right? Like, it's doing this. And I find myself just getting sicker than I've ever felt in my life. I mean, nausea is a terrible thing. I would rather be in pain than nauseous, all right? Like, you can't think of anything else except nausea. It's awful. And I'm holding on to the side railing and my stomach is just churning. It's awful. And I'm holding on for dear life. And the deckhand, who looked like he was born at sea, like when he opened his mouth to say hello at the start of the trip, I really did expect pirate, all right? Like I really, really did. Maybe you've met that deckhand, maybe you are that deckhand, all right? Well, anyways, he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, looks like you're about to turn green, son. I was just, Don't want to open your mouth too wide at that point. And he said this, with one hand on my shoulder, he pointed out with his other hand and said, this is gonna fix it. I want you to lock, see that horizon right there? that thing, the only thing that's not moving, the boat's doing this, and that horizon's just staying right there. I want you to lock your eyes in on that horizon. I want you to fix your eyes on it. I want you to set your eyes on it. I do not want you to think of anything else but that horizon. I want you to look at that horizon and lock in. Now, I had hesitations about taking medical advice from this person. Large hesitations. But I also had no better idea. So I grabbed a hold of the rail and I locked in. And I locked in. And I locked in, and I fixed my eyes, and I fixed my mind, and I just locked in on that horizon. And the boat is doing this, and that horizon's just fixed. And wouldn't you know it, within moments on the inside of me, that which was stirring and churning and violent on the inside of me began to get calmer and calmer, and it began to reflect the steadiness of that which I was gazing at, the steadiness of that which I was locking my eyes on, the steadiness of that horizon. And wouldn't you know it, that within a matter of a few more seconds, I was completely fine and at peace. I could actually focus on what I was doing. Today, if you've come in here and you relate a whole lot with Abram because of that angst inside of you, may you set your eyes on the horizon. May you set your eyes on the eternal. May you set your eyes on the place where God has his eyes, and you will find your heart in sync with his. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you so much that you have set eternity in the hearts of every single person. And Lord, I pray, God, that as we are here, as we have laid our lives before you, that like you came to me a few years ago when I opened up that letter to the Laodiceans, Lord, may you speak. May your spirit speak so loudly. And Lord, I pray that we would respond with ordering our life in a way that we carry an obsession about eternity. We love you. Oh, we love you, God. And we thank you in your name. And everybody said, amen. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in and for experiencing this service with us. What we find in Scripture is an encouragement not just to be hearers of the word, but doers of the word. And the encouragement that we want to leave you with in light of that is don't let this just be content. You see, on this platform, you'll see a lot of content. There's a lot of things that can fill a lot of your time, but we want this to be more. We want this to be life transformative in the next step that it sets up in your life. On the screen right now, you're gonna see a QR code just kind of flash up there. We'd love for you to scan that QR code, and what it's gonna be is it's going to help you find that next step to connect with us. And in that, we can help direct you to whatever is that next step in your life to connect you, not just with content, which you found, but also with the body, with other believers, with people who are walking the same journey, whether it be from a place of honest questions and doubt to a place of, hey, I want to grow and mature in my relationship with God. But we want to thank you for tuning in with us. We've loved spending the time with you, and we'll see you later.